We start off with our top story. Chinese President Xi is on his way to Cuba, but he has spent the past few days in Venezuela, where he made a few cultural stops and laid out the groundwork for some pretty big trade agreements, including one based on oil. Martin Markovits joins us now live from Caracas with the details. Hi, Martin.
Hi, how are you? Yes, today was the end of President Xi Jinping's trip to Venezuela. He arrived from Argentina yesterday, and soon afterward, once he arrived, he was decorated with the Order of the Liberator, which is the highest decoration in Venezuela. Today, Maduro and Xi signed a series of bilateral agreements. The two allies have signed in the past years 480 agreements that encompass over 143 joint projects, including in areas of infrastructure and oil development. But the one thing on everybody's mind is whether China in the near future can replace the U.S. as the biggest buyer of Venezuelan oil.
Venezuelan oil sales to Asia are surging. Trade deals struck under the late President Hugo Chavez are being felt well beyond his death. For the first time ever, more oil was sent to Asia than to North America last year. As Venezuela focuses now on countries like China and India, the United States, Caracas' long-standing trade partner, is being increasingly ignored. Under Chavez, the oil-rich nation moved away from its traditional Western allies as the leftist leader pushed Venezuela towards his plans for 21st century socialism. Venezuelan crude is swapped for loans to finance everything from free housing, schools, transportation, and even health care. President Nicolas Maduro has continued and even expanded such deals, pledging to continue the Chavez legacy.
In the
case of India and China, who are new excellent clients for Venezuela, they understand commercial relations not only as an exchange of products, but as a friendship, cooperation, broadening relations, and thinking in multipolar world.
Now that Caracas is facing financial crisis, many say the country needs to get back to the basics of doing business, not politics. Many point out that despite the government's anti-U.S. rhetoric, it still depends on Washington to pay the bills.
The
United States pays in cash. The relationship isn't based in loans or trade accords, but supply and demand. Paradoxically, the Venezuelan government very much depends on the sale of oil exports to the U.S., but at the same time attacks them. It's a situation that I call schizophrenic.
Yes, U.S. exports still account for almost a third of Venezuelan oil production, making the U.S. Venezuela's largest client. But even as sales to Asia rise with the growing economic crisis in Venezuela, many doubt that the relationship is likely to end anytime soon.
So, Martin, you asked this question earlier, whether or not China could replace the U.S. as the #1 buyer of oil. A little competition there. Now, in all reality, is it realistic, and how significant might that be if that were to happen?
Well, during the past decade, Venezuelan oil exports to the U.S. have been in decline, while exports to China have been on the rise. As part of the recent China-Venezuelan agreement, some analysts expect oil production to increase by 360,000 barrels per day in the short term, which would surpass what it currently exports to the U.S. But still, many have doubts. They point to the fact that the U.S. already has the infrastructure in place in the Gulf region to process Venezuelan crude, which is a very heavy type of oil. Also, China's long distance from Venezuela compared to the U.S. is another big hurdle in achieving that goal.
All right, Martin, we're learning about oil. Thank you very much, live for us in Caracas.